Hey everybody, and welcome to a very special episode of the Irish Wrestling Podcast. I'm joined by author Stephen Bell, who has written it's been out for a few months now, the Dynamite and Davey, The Explosive Lives of the British Bulldogs book. Stephen, first of all, before we get in, how are you? How are you keeping since the madness ensued since the book came out?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been really great. It has been a bit of a whirlwind. It sort of came in two waves because there was the UK release, and then 5 or 6 months down the line, the worldwide release. And
Yeah,
because there were quite a little bit more, particularly in Canada, but also in the US as well. There were it being released in the UK initially, and sort of getting that publicity out there had worked really well to sort of build up some anticipation over there.
yeah,
And in hindsight, that's worked really well, particularly in Canada. The copies have shifted almost too quick. We haven't been able to get copies over quick enough. So yeah, it has been a bit of a whirlwind. And then just as that were calming down, really decided to pick up some publicity to try and get the book under some Christmas trees
yeah.
for dads and brothers and uncles.
How have you dealt with it? Like, the fame side of the thing. You've been inundated with interview requests, and maybe traveling the place. I'm not sure if you've traveled over to America or Canada to promote it. Have you? Or
I haven't, but only because I think obviously COVID and
yeah,
what we're doing now via Zoom largely changed all that.
mm,
There's so little need to do that much traveling now. Obviously, it'd be a pleasure to do, and something that I think I will do eventually with it. I've made such good friends, particularly in Canada. So
yeah,
Rossart and Bronwyn, Billington, anybody that knows who's read the book or followed any of the other publicity that I've done, I'll realise that I've really good friendship with those two, and
yeah.
their help and assistance really does mean a lot to me. And we speak regular. So yeah, eventually I'd like to get over there and meet them face to face. But no, I mean, you use the word fame. I certainly don't class it as any kind of fame, but it's been really surreal. You know, I did Talk Is Jericho, which was
Yeah.
a really good one to be able to do, and then I've sort of met Brett face to face and had a good chat with him about the book, and Mick Foley's spoken openly in public about the book. So yeah, I think them having not only been sort of three of me wrestling sort of childhood heroes, and the sort of remain three of the wrestling industry type people who
Yeah.
I do have the most respect for, sort of behind the curtain, for want of a better phrase. And I also think they're the three people that have written the best three wrestling books. So to
Yeah.
have the three be the three that have sort of come out in public with such warm words, as well as your likes of Dave Meltzer and people like that. It's that side of it. I was very nervous for various reasons, very nervous for when the reviews were going to start coming in, more so than I've been with my previous two books. Felt like I had a lot riding on this, being pitched right, being pitched accurately. I really wanted to tread that line between it not appearing as any kind of whitewashing, but also not in any way being a hit job or anything like that. And the guys, I wanted it to be something that enhanced their legacies in the eyes of wrestling fans, proper wrestling fans who have read all them
Yeah.
sort of books and listened to wrestling podcasts, who know a bit about the story anyway. And so yeah, it were a tough line to tread, and I was sort of taking Bronwyn's advice on where about that, and Ross's advice, and there were times when there were, even despite us building up a friendship, there were a little bit of friction about that as to where it should be pitched. There were bits that I wanted to keep in, bits,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so yeah, when the review started coming in so positive, and virtually everyone seemed to suggest that I'd got that right. If anything, there were a couple that suggested it could be a little bit, almost too positive, really. But I would sooner that than it be something that I think the negative side, especially where Tom's concerned, where the Dynamite Kid's concerned, the negatives almost been spoke about too much, and for a long time and a lot of years and a lot of decades, his legacy was more about negativity and the stuff that happened that was far removed from anything that was happening in the ring. But it really took a big shine off what he accomplished in the ring and his
Yeah,
legacy.
it did.
I'd signed on the bottom line to do this book before they even announced the Dark Side of the Ring documentary. But I think between the Dark Side of the Ring documentary, which is always going to be quite salacious and concentrate, in a 40-minute documentary called Dark Side of the Ring, on an episode that was about the life and times of the Dynamite Kid, they were always going to be quite negative, but I thought they managed to get enough in from your likes of Bronwyn and Michelle, his ex-wife, to
Yeah.
sort of chip away a bit of that positive side. And I think, and the feedback that I get from Bronwyn and also Michelle, I think my book off the back of that sort of maybe just tipped the balance slightly, where now when people hear the name the Dynamite Kid, if you've seen that episode of Dark
I
Side of
did,
the
yeah.
Ring and you've read my book, I think that possibly the first thing that comes into your mind now is, wow, what an awesome trailblazing wrestler who had some who had some troubles in his life, rather than just a pile of negativity, which we all the feedback suggests that I've got that about right, and that were really pleasing. So then it was just a matter of waiting and seeing what the public made of it and what the readers made of it, and that's been pretty much overwhelmingly positive. So yeah, now it's just a matter of keeping on trying to get it out there. I just want as many people to read the story as they can, and it seems slowly but surely going out there.
It's phenomenal. Like I listened to the audiobook before I read the book itself. I done both. I find it hard to sit down and read a book with life in general. Like, so audiobooks are something I've gotten into, obviously, since the pandemic.
Wow.
People have probably gotten into that. So listening to audiobook was brilliant. I really enjoyed.
Oh, wow. I'm really pleased you've said that, because I haven't, obviously doing the audiobook was kind of an afterthought, really. Pitch Publishing, my publisher, hadn't quite stepped into that world yet. I'm an avid audiobook listener myself. So they picked sort of some of the best-selling new releases at the time. 3 of us, I think, who they picked and said, look, we've got a system in place that we'd like, but the only way it's viable for us is for you to read it yourself.
Yeah.
So I thought, oh, well, I'm more than happy to give that a go. I want it out there. Like I said, I love audiobooks myself. I want it out there, right? I'll give it a go. So I did. And it took me a long time, a lot of redos and a lot of chipping away at it. And I was a little bit paranoid about my accent and things like that, about how it had come across. And it seems to be selling quite well.
Yeah, it worked. Your accent works for it because of where they're from, like, Northern England.
I were insistent that Ross record his bit and Bronwyn record a bit, just to give it a little bit of a difference in tone at the beginning. And then I'd had, even though it's selling quite well, I'd had very little feedback, or zero feedback really, compared to what I've had to the rest of the book. And then suddenly I saw that a review had landed on audible.com rather than audible.co.uk. And it was a 1-star review, and I thought, what? I've had very few of them in the hundreds and hundreds of reviews that there's been about the book. I wonder what. First thing I thought is it my reading of it? Well, it turns out it was, but not anything that I can sort of pinpoint as being my fault. He openly admitted that he just couldn't understand me, and I thought, well, fair enough. He didn't say one thing about the book actually being bad, or even my recording style being bad. He just openly admitted, I can't understand him. I know it's the English language, and he's English and I'm not, but that's my problem. I couldn't understand it. I've had to not listen to it. Can you please record an American version? I thought, well, not really, no.
No, put on an American accent. What's your best American accent?
Yeah, so I'm pleased to finally hear somebody say that they enjoyed it.
Yeah, we in the gym, like that's where I listen to most of it, like, and like it's great to go through the hour of the gym or 2 hours and whatever you spend in the gym and listen to it. It's a great way to get through it, because you're trying to focus on what you're doing, but you're so focused on the story that you're listening to. Like each chapter is like, oh my god, and I was so infused with some of the stories. I was like, how did you get this research? Like, you getting back behind the curtain, as you say, like, getting all these stories from the road and Japan, and traveling across Canada and stuff, and obviously with the accident and stuff, like, they probably would have a lot of details of people telling their sides of the story. Like I wondered how difficult was it for you to actually research all this stuff?
Well, you've used the word difficult. It's like it's a labor of love, it's difficult as in the fact that it's time consuming, it's laborious, but it's the reason that I feel like having done 2 books already, this was the one that I've been sort of building towards. I feel like I got an affinity with the guys. I'm from a northern mining town myself,
Yeah.
and as growing up a wrestling fan, a childhood wrestling fan, I'd seen Davey Boy and as the British Bulldog, and he was this larger than life character with the Union Jack stuff. We all supported him no matter what, to the end of the earth kind of thing. He was our guy. And then later on, he was still around in parts during the Attitude Era. So it sort of transcended my 2 main eras of fandom there. And it weren't long after that when he died, and it sort of took wind out of my sails. I remember exactly where I was when I heard that he died. And so I read Mick Foley's book. I'd got I had a back catalogue going on, a VHS tapes going all the way back to WrestleMania 1. So that introduced me to the Bulldogs as a tag team, introduced me to Dynamite Kid. Then, having read like Mick Foley's first book and started to read a bit of internet dirt sheety types things and other books that were coming out, including Dynamite's eventually, I realised all these facts, that they were first cousins, that they were grew up just 2 streets apart, trained at the same gym by the same trainer, got into the business in the same way at such a young age. All these facts that I started to find out almost by accident, just by not research as it were at the time, just purely being interested in it. And because I'd got this shared heritage with them that I felt, being only living sort of 40 minutes away, I really just became enamored with their story, fascinated with that story. And the more that I found out, especially on Tom's story, it's such a roller coaster ride. And then Davies is towards the end, and their relationship with each other is a roller coaster ride. So sort of 15 years later, after I'd sort of put all this together, I suppose Brett's book would have been when it really started to come together. But 10 or 15 years later, I'm there with 2 quite successful sports books behind me and a publisher saying, what do you want to do next? And I just thought, yeah, I think I'm going to give it a go. So I knew quite a lot of the story already as I'm going in. It was just a matter of putting as much meat on the bones as I could, and making sure that I could pick out truth from wrestling, usual wrestling stories. And sort of so what I tried to do was get as many different points of view about the stories that I wanted to concentrate on, get different points of view, people's different perspective. And there's just so much out there now between all the wrestling podcasts that there is. I just listen to them all day, at work, in the car, walking the dog, just trying to pick up little anecdotes or little points of view or little opinions, quotes from your Bruce Pritchards of the world, and people like that, just slowly trying to piece that together. So between that and articles, books, I mean, you've got sort of 4 members of the art family that have written books. And then when I sort of cracked getting into the family and becoming so close with Bronwyn and Ross, and I interviewed Bruce Hart, I spoke to Keith Hart, eventually spoke to Brett as well, Michelle Billington, Mark Billington, Tom's brother, who still lives in Wigan. Managed to just sort of piece all this together, and it was just like a jigsaw piece that I had to put together. So a lot of the stories that I write I didn't want to write a clunky book which were just quotes from various people being filled together. I wanted it to flow nicely with me narrating the story. I've always had this where I've got a passion for writing because I've got a passion for books, and I'd only want to write a book and write a story that I would want to read myself, done in the style that I would like to read it. So I wanted it to flow and I wanted it to be accurate. So what I did, I sort of pulled in all these different perspectives from different anecdotes and tried to formulate them into whole chapters that flowed well, but respected everybody's point of view.
Yeah.
Sort of once you've got that many points of view on something, you start to be able to see, well, I think he's got that bit wrong, so I'm not going to include that. This bit's sort of ratified now by 2 or 3 different sources, so that's going in. He says that he said that, no reason to doubt that. What would he have said back? Yeah, he'd have probably said that back. I'll go with that. And sort of the next thing you know, you've built up a scene, which flows into another scene and builds up a chapter. And by the end of it, I was just sort of loving that side of it and being able to write it like that. So, but we're also aware that doing it in that way and not having all the constant direct quotes, well, potentially going to leave me open to criticism. So that's why at the back I've done quite an extensive. Each chapter is sourced to so that the readers who are interested, and I think particularly big wrestling fans will be quite interested.
100%. Yeah.
Go back and sort of see what all my sources were that I built up that particular chapter with, which I think it's quite a unique way to go about it, but I think it works really well.
Yeah, I like the way you told it. Like, it's like, if you look at it from a reader's view, it's like the first half of the book is, you know, is kind of like a biography of Tom's life kind of thing, and then it breaks into Bulldog's career towards the end. And I just love the way it flows. You know, getting to finding out all these stories that you never knew. Like, even as a wrestling fan, my whole life, you know, like yourself, I came into wrestling in the 80s. At home, when I grew up, we had Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks on the World of Sports on ITV. That's what we used to watch. And then the American wrestling, as our parents used to call it, you can't watch that stuff. That's not Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks. These aren't real wrestlers. So we started watching that, and it was like 91, 92 era that I started getting into WWF at the time. So it would have been just Davey on his own. So later in life, I found the Dynamite Kid as well. It wasn't until maybe again 10 years after.
Well, it's funny you say that, because people of our generation who discovered it in that way, I remember thinking, I've told this story to a lot of people, and almost everyone have said that is exactly what I thought, and that was that when they first discovered the British Bulldogs, the tag team, it was after they already knew of the British Bulldog, the solo star, and they kind of thought, like I did, my first assumption was, oh, they've just dragged any British wrestler they can find off the street just to put with Davey so they can have him in as a tag team. Obviously, I saw Solo just concentrating on the pay-per-views from my VHS collection that I was putting together. That weren't a fair reflection of Dynamite, because there were majority of them multi-man tag team matches, and it were already past his best and carrying injuries. So that naive view of him that I got weren't a fair reflection on him. But it was only when I started to read about the Dynamite Kid, I realized that it was completely the other way around, and Tom was obviously the leader at the time, and particularly around the WrestleMania 2, when they won the tag belts, he was widely regarded as the best in the world, and pound for pound in the world. So it was revelations like that, through just sort of natural research and reading, that really sort of hooked me onto the story at quite a young age. And it, like I say, it was between finding out all that, I mean, what you're talking, it'd have been 2001 probably when I read Mick's book, which I sort of, in my mind, I think that's when I really started to get intrigued, because he talks about Tom being the best in the world in his book at that time, and he tells the story of Tom breaking his jaw in one of his first ever matches, and he talks about him as a person, and then talks about him again as a person later on in the book, that they became quite good friends in Japan in the 90s. Talks about Davey quite a lot in the book, and it was then when I really started to sort of get hooked on them and their sort of story. So you're talking pretty much 20 years later when I got round to finalising the book. So it's been a long journey, but I think the book actually does that journey proud in the end.
It does. It does. Did you go back and watch a lot of his stuff in Japan, or were you able to find a lot of the old matches?
Yeah, there's story. I mean, we've never been in a better place to research and watch. You know, with the amount of information that's out there and videos and YouTube, and while a lot of it is still missing, his catalogue is far from complete. A lot of it is available, certainly enough to give you a good idea of just how good he was and how explosive he was. You don't have to. I think the one that really opened my eyes, and that's why I put it forward as a real turning point for him, was when he faced Fujinami in Calgary. The New Japan did a tour of North America, including stopping off in all the territories, and Fujinami was their junior heavyweight champion at the time, and so that was 1979. So Stuart put Tom up against him to want the best man that could to showcase Fujinami around the world. But what it did, they wrestled to a sort of a brutal, hard-hitting count-out draw, and it really served more to put Tom over than it did Fujinami. And really, whilst they were looking for exposure for their talent in North America, the New Japan office, what they discovered was the Dynamite Kid, and within months he was becoming a legend in Japan over there. So I think if anybody wants to watch, you don't have to actually watch a Japanese production to see him have what I feel one of his best matches against the Japanese star, because it took place in Calgary, and that's readily available on YouTube.
Yeah, and just to speak about Calgary and Stampede and stuff, like with the going through the chapters in the book, I just remember in one of the chapters where Brett had traveled over and had been teaming with Big Daddy, and I was so blown away with that Bret Hart had teamed with Big Daddy, and I couldn't believe it. I was trying to find it online. I couldn't find it anywhere. It took me a long time to try and find it, and still haven't come across it.
Well, I befriended a lot of as many as I could, or a few anyway, wrestling historians, because they are the more reliable for the information than the wrestlers, because they care about the facts. The wrestlers can be forgetful of the facts, or even be tempted to put themselves over in the way that they tell stories, and that's when you sort of get conflicted and you risk making mistakes. So I've curated myself a little army of historians to run things by, and Tony Earnshaw is just got this mad, wild collection of old British wrestling bills, cards, information. He as a young man, he was putting up the ring, and that's how he just curated it over years and years and decades. And it were him. He puts them on almost every day on a daily basis on Twitter. If anybody wants to follow him, he puts them on a daily basis, like the anniversary ones of what's happened on certain days, and some of them are just mind blowing. So you've got, because I'm originally from Featherstone, which was the hometown of Malcolm King Kong Kirk,
right?
And so there's bills where it's Bret Hart against Mal Kirk, who was like sort of a little bit of a legend in my hometown, and people have got stories from him from playing cards with him in the local pubs. And I grew up with some of them stories at the same time that I was growing up hero worshipping Bret Hart. And when I saw that Bret Hart versus Malcolm King Kong Kirk, I was blown away, because I'm thinking, you mean to tell me that when I was a kid, local Mal had wrestled Bret Hart, who I was worshipping at the time? But there's so many of them that come across each other, and so many of them that cross paths that you'd have never believed.
That's a great thing about the book, is that you as a fan, lifelong fan, like you're hearing stories that you had never heard before, and it's just so intrigued. You're so caught up in it. Like I said, like with the audiobook, you're sitting in the gym trying to focus on what you're doing, and next thing you know, you hear Brett is teaming with Big Daddy. It's like, what? Hang on a minute. And putting stuff down. It's like, wow, how is this possible?
I remember I'm almost, because I obviously still very much a fan as I'm writing it.
Yeah.
I've always got a certain demographic in mind, and the best one for me to use, because I'm such a fan. I thought, well, in essence, I am aiming this book at myself. I'm aiming at a British wrestling fan who grew up in that kind of era. They are the people who are going to find this book most interesting. Absolutely. And it's going to appeal to most. That is my main audience. Anybody else is welcome to read it. I think anybody else will enjoy it, but that is the demographic that I want to target it. So that is why I put a lot of them little things in, because I'm thinking, if it blew my mind, it's probably going to blow some of their minds. So.
Yeah, and the prankster that Tom was, like, with the Mick Foley book, he used to talk about Owen and the pranks he used to pull. Everybody was, heard about all Owen's pranks. I never really heard of any of Tom's pranks until I read the book. So, was there any pranks that you left out? Was there anything that you actually left out that you couldn't talk about? Was there anything that he pulled that might have been too over
I
the
don't know.
top?
I think his pranks largely, as opposed to Owen's, which were seen as playful, pretty harmless. Tom's crossed the line to where a lot of people got, offended, annoyed, and frustrated. But because he had such a reputation about him, people were scared to show that because there was only going to be one winner if they vented it too much. So it seems like people only came out and talked about that after Tom had not died, but when he'd sort of completely disappeared from the scene and were wheelchair bound. That's when people started coming out and sort of talking about all that. So yeah, the defecating in bags and stuff like that you've struggled to find funny now, certainly. But then the ones that also kind of are right on the line, my favorite one is when he's rooming with J.R. Foley. J.R. Foley loves a drink, and is rooming with him as the tour in Calgary. Notices that when J.R. Foley needs to go and do a number two, every time Tom follows him into the bathroom, there's stubbed out cigarette butts down the toilet. So he puts flammable liquid down there and just waits for the action to ensue, which it does. And J.R. Foley comes sprinting out with singed privates. Now, I think that's sort of, that's very much on that line. It could have been nasty. It weren't.
It's like a scene from a Home Alone movie, like.
Yeah. You can see that. You can laugh.
Yeah.
I think that's great. Many times when he crossed that line, I think Davey, it's been said so many times that Davey was sort of a follower, not a leader. So when Davey was very much in the Bulldogs and following Tom and hero worshipping Tom, he crossed that line as well. But I don't think that was his natural. His natural tendency was to be a little bit more like Owen. So when he was so close to Owen. So people who knew him from the different eras, like I heard people talk about Davey in very much the same tone as they talked about Tom, that, and the word bully was used and things like that. But then people who only knew him from the mid to late 90s sort of seemed to know him as this absolutely playful, light-hearted, happy-go-lucky guy, which I think that will pull him more where he will pitch naturally. But he did so much hero worship Tom that, and you couldn't blame him for that. It was Tom's talent and Tom's determination to reach the top. Davey spent a long time riding them coattails, so you couldn't blame him for following him as sort of everything about him and not just in the ring. So yeah, it was sort of interesting how I think their journey and their relationship with each other. Well, the bit that I found most fascinating, it was the bit that's certainly never been done before. It's sort of a deep dive on why they had the relationship that they did, both the ups and the downs. And I think I managed to crack some of the bits of that story that people didn't know, probably a bit confused as to why they didn't like each other at certain points, why they'll had such an emotional roller coaster ride together.
Yeah, well, as you said in the book, obviously a lot of people mightn't have known they were first cousins. Tom didn't really want to put him under his wing at the start. He was already gone to Canada. He didn't want Davey probably riding on his coattails. He wanted to be a single star as well. So tag teaming wasn't really his thing at the start of his career. But obviously as a tag team together, they were natural. Like they worked well together.
Once Davey had sort of passed the test that Tom put in front of him.
He put him through some tough tests.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. Very much so. But once he proved himself, he proved that he was good enough to hang at that level and then some. And also that he was willing to sacrifice himself for others and do whatever it took. Once Tom was satisfied that was the case, he was completely, unbelievably loyal to him, put him over as often as they could, and pitched him to be champion, pitched him to hold belts, and obviously couldn't wait to then tag team with him once he knew how good his cousin was.
Yeah, well, like you said, like as good as the tag team they were, the legacy they left behind was something that's still around today. Like the amount of people who they inspired, Tom specifically, obviously with Chris Benoit, and the way the indie scene is at the minute with AEW and Japan. Like a lot of the people who would have taken after them, watching them growing up, or their styles, like even that strong style that's out there at the minute is probably inspired a lot of what they achieved in Japan and what they've achieved in the United States as well.
Oh, yeah, it's difficult to quantify. It's just endless, really. The people that still, as a tag team, the Bulldogs get talked about still regularly as being around at the time, them the Art Foundation. But I think the Bulldogs, especially with the way they conquered Japan and they revolutionized a lot of it in Japan as well, they were the real trailblazers. A lot of people credit them with changing global tag team wrestling almost from a generally quite slow, monotonous sort of paint by numbers style matches to these absolutely revelationary, hard-hitting, high-paced, high-impact matches that we ended up seeing in the series of matches that they had with the Art Foundation, well, when that was sort of really rubber stamped. But yeah, Tom, even today, people still talk about him endlessly as being some of their biggest influences in certain particular matches. I know, obviously, through my research, you come across all the time certain quotes that have been made. But even as recent as, and this were actually on WWE TV, which kind of surprised me, but because he doesn't seem to be the most popular guy, legacy-wise with WWE, but that'll maybe change now. But even Becky Lynch, Ridge Holland, both on their sort of little documentaries that they've got on there about the training and things like that, both of them credit Dynamite Kid. So yeah, it's still being felt very much today.
Yeah, and you're mentioned in the book as well that Tom's nephews they're the new British Bulldogs. They have something going at the moment in the UK of the year.
Beyond that now, they're absolutely flying into. To be honest, they've followed in the footsteps in the wake of the book. Since the book was finished and released, they went over to Canada and wrestled in Canada, in Western Canada, for 6 weeks, I think it was, just picking up a few independent spots here and there. But they are ridiculously impressive. They are very, very impressive young lads. And yeah, the wrestlers, the Billington Bulldogs, and off of the back of them, they got signed with MLW.
Oh, right.
So they're in North America now, as far as I know. So yeah, they've got a good future ahead of them boys, and they are Tom. He's called Thomas Billington, and obviously named after his uncle.
Yeah.
And he is the doppelganger of Dynamite Kid. Yeah, it's absolutely outrageous. It is physical appearance, his build, his wrestling style, everything it's eerie.
Phenomenal. And also another thing I found in the book was when Davey actually got a chance to team with Harry before he passed away, which broke my heart when I found out. I didn't think it ever happened. I didn't realize it actually ever happened. I never heard about it.
Yeah, it did. It happened the weekend before Davey died. And
yeah, which is heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, and it kind of makes it more tragic because he was on that comeback trail. He had achieved that sort of little dream that he'd got for himself of teaming with Harry, who was sort of 16-year-old at the time, I think.
Yeah.
And had this big future ahead of him, and they had planned to be a father-son tag team for as long as they could be before the end of Davey's career, which the end of Davey's career was overdue. He'd been written off 2 or 3 times already. It were on a sort of final leg. He'd had quite a few comebacks at that point. He was certainly not at his best, but one final run with Harry was what he felt he could accomplish, and that had been a dream come true for him. So he got to achieve a little bit of it, which was these first 2 matches, just at some small independent circuits in Canada. And then the week after, he tragically died. So yeah, it makes it more tragic that they were on the cusp of doing that. but also it's kind of nice that they did actually get to do it.
Yeah, it is bittersweet, like, that he got a chance to team with, and it's obviously something Harry will never forget, that he got a chance to team with his dad. Like, but it's just I wish it would have been, more widespread. More people would have seen it happen, like, because it's never talked about. When Harry came to the WWE, they obviously mentioned who he was, but they would never have talked about him teaming with his dad, or wouldn't let people know
No,
it actually ever happened.
no, they never did it. Bruce Pritchard talks about on his podcast that it was something that they were keeping their eye on right up until he was working in the WWE office at the time, and it was something that they were very much aware of, was
Yeah,
a potential Davey comeback coinciding with Harry coming on their radar as a young talent,
yeah,
and something that they would have definitely considered. So there were a good chance that they would have pulled it off on a bigger stage, but it wasn't to be.
yeah. The story itself, like, it's like I said, it's such a compelling for a wrestling fan, but I think it would be compelling for people outside of wrestling as well. It's, with the success of Fighting with My Family, the Page story. Do you think something, a movie and adaptation of the book could ever happen? It's got that
Uh,
ability.
I think it's got. I think the story's there.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably got a limited time window to happen. It's not something I can't reveal too much, but there is. I have spoken to someone who's got something in mind for it, but not a
Okay.
movie. But yeah, I think it's definitely got the scope. I think it's got a limited time period before it becomes not quite contemporary enough
Yeah.
for a wider audience, and becomes a little bit too niche. I don't think the human element of it gives it that extra layer, and the family
Yeah.
relationships over just a standard wrestling story or a standard wrestler's biography. That I do think that the book has got the ability to transcend its own sort of little genre that it sits in. I've certainly tried to pitch it that way. You'll have seen the sort of glossary of terms that I did at the start. Most wrestling fans wouldn't need that. They'll
Yeah.
know what them terms are as and when they come across them. But I didn't want the book to sort of exist in a vacuum where the reader was expected to know this inside jargon. So I've put that in there, and that's all designed to sort of entice it to appeal to a wider audience, which I think it does,
I think
and
it
I've had
does.
some decent feedback on that.
Yeah, and with the way things are at the moment, the wrestling, obviously, with the Vice documentaries, and now Netflix getting involved with the documentary about Vince, and Chris Hemsworth's going to be playing Hulk Hogan in a movie. Like, there's obviously a market out there for
Yeah, and there's
people to get involved.
what they call the other
Oh, the Von Erichs.
Throb, yeah,
Oh,
who's playing Kevin Von
uh,
Erich, and
Zac
uh,
Efron. Yeah,
Zac Efron's
yeah,
playing Kevin Von Erich, yeah.
yeah, and MGF is
So
going to be
yeah,
in that movie as well.
it's really mainstream at the minute. I think it's become sort of pop culture or general knowledge that
Mhm.
there is a lot hidden behind that curtain. Where at
Yeah,
one point it was sort of wrestling fans who sort of know about that. That does sort of seem to have crept out to a wider audience now. So people know that they're probably in for a roller coaster ride when
yeah.
it's a wrestling story.
Well, if it does turn into a movie, I hope you get involved with it. That you get a chance to maybe help write the script, or you're got some input on the story itself, the script, and maybe you get a chance to
Yeah,
cast someone yourself.
I think I've the story could only have been done. I remember being quite surprised that it hadn't been done already.
Yeah,
But through the research and speaking to the people I spoke to at length, I discovered why it hadn't been. The two guys ended on such bad terms.
mhm,
Davey died so young. Uh, Dynamite had released the book already, even a year or two before Davey
yeah,
died, which really slams Davey. It left all that situation left a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths, and to bring both sides of that family together for a project was always going to be extremely difficult. And um, they they've got a different sort of view on what should be common knowledge and what shouldn't be common knowledge and what should be talked about and what shouldn't be. So I quickly discovered why it had never been done. But I think the fact that I managed to get it over the line and sort of compromise in that way to try and sort of get it over the line, it is something that I think will stand the test of time, and somebody won't want to go through all that again, I don't think. So I do think my book would probably just be used as the right, well, this is already there, let's go with this. That's the impression that I get.
Have you anything else in the pipeline now? You're writing anything else? Are you going to stick within the wrestling industry, or are you moving on to some other sports?
Well, yeah, I've got a few. You know, as you're doing your research, especially with wrestling's concerned, you sort of discover more and more fantastic stories. And so I've got 3 or 4 that I'm just sort of monitoring, for the want of a better word, just doing a little bit of lazy research, just seeing which one really puts its head above the parapet and explodes as the one that I feel I've got to do. The one that I've gone sort of public on so far would be the Chris Adams story. It's very similar in style to Dynamite and Davey, except it'd just be him as a solo. But yeah, he's got a very similar story, British heritage and British wrestling trained, and went on to seek his fame and fortune stateside and got involved in the darker side of wrestling and the culture there, and had a very sorry end, an even sorrier end than either Dynamite or Davey. So yeah, that's the one. I'm sort of just putting that out there at minute to see if I get any feedback from friends and family who would like to contribute or like to see it happen. But yeah, there is other ones also going off in the background. Some of them ancient stories that I'd love to unearth, but just question whether or not they'd have that appeal to a current audience, and whether I could get the publisher to push for that. So yeah, I will be doing one. It's just a matter of which one at the minute.
Well, there's no doubt the success of this book and how good it is going to obviously open doors for you within the industry. If you need to reach out to people, they'll know who you are after this, and they'll respect the work that you've done. And I think it's something that,
there were a time when I felt I thought, well, I might maybe do something different. There's other great stories out there that I know about and that I'm aware of, but yeah, being able to lean on the current relationships that I've made, and who knows, quick email to name drop too much, but
well, this is it now.
An email to the Talk is Jericho. Talk is Jericho producer. Are you short of a guest coming up? I've got something else I'd like to plug. Yeah, it is something that's hard to, once you've curated that phone book contact list of people that could help you both with your research and with your publicity. Yeah, it's a difficult one to turn your back on, especially when there's such a plethora of great stories out there.
Well, as you said at the start, it is available now. It's available just in time for Christmas. You can get it. It's available on Amazon at the moment. Is that right? You posted that?
It is, yeah. I mean, we had a huge flood of sales. It had gone to reprint. We'd sold the first full batch of print copies, and obviously the ebook and the audiobook were still readily available, but you can't wrap them up and put them under the tree. So I really wanted to have the physical copy readily available for everybody, but I had a great sort of run of publicity following on from Talk is Jericho. There were a couple of other little bits, and it got 2 really solid mentions on the ad-free shows, guys. Mick Foley gave it a plug on us, and it were used heavily for JR's podcast. They did a Davey Boy British Bulldog themed episode all about the life and times, and it were used quite heavily for that. It were quoted in that and referenced. And a few other bits just sort of went back to back, and there was this huge flood of sales. And next thing I know, before we'd had the second print run fully done and back in stores, it had sold out. And I thought, oh wow, that's bad in time for Christmas. But no, it is back in stock with Amazon or anywhere else where you get your books, I suppose. But yeah.
Well, you're here first, people. If you need a copy of it before Christmas morning, go on Amazon right now. You can get the hard copy. If you're listening in Ireland or you're watching in Ireland, check out Easton's as well. I checked earlier today. I think it's available there at the moment. It's limited stock as well, but get as quick as you can. But obviously, if somebody likes the audiobooks, get it on Audible or Amazon. You can get the audiobooks there as well, which is, like I said, January time. If you're joining the gym and you're looking for something to listen to this. It's a great listen to, and obviously get their book as after and read it. It's for a wrestling fan. If you're not a wrestling fan, whatever you're into, it's just a great story about two great wrestlers who had tragic circumstances follow them throughout their careers, and they died way too young, and hopefully their legacies will live on forever, though, through people like Stephen here writing books about them, and obviously their kids and nephews and family leading their legacies on. So it's something that that hopefully should live forever with the British Bulldogs. But Stephen, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thanks for your time.
No, thank you very much.
Yeah. I'm Jerry. This is the Irish Wrestling Podcast. We'll talk to you next time. Thanks a lot, guys.
Jerry, thank you.